Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network, everybody. This is Jesse Weber. The reason you are watching right now replays of the Zachary Adams case from this past September, and remember, he was convicted of first-degree murder, rape, and kidnapping of 20-year-old nursing student Holly Bobo. This is out of Tennessee. The reason we're showing you this is because it was just decided last week that his brother, John Dylan Adams, will face trial on May 29th, again in connection with this same crime. He is one of three men charged in this case: John Dylan Adams, Zachary Adams, as well as Jason Autry. And anybody who's been following this case knows that name. He was a witness in the Zachary Adams case. He will also, his case is not set until after the John Dylan Adams case. Remember, he might have been granted immunity in connection with his testimony, so we're not going to have to watch and wait and hear what happens there. But again, we are analyzing the Holly Bobo case because we now know that John Dylan Adams will face trial later on in a few months, and we'll make sure to cover it here on the Law&Crime Network. But that is why we are covering that today. But I do have to preview also another case, a very exciting case that we're covering out of Florida, which begins tomorrow. This is the case of three individuals: Laquan Brown, Gary King, and Michael Smith. They're each charged with one count of second-degree murder for the death of 19-year-old Benetria Robinson in 2015 in a nightclub shooting out of Florida. It was called the Cloud9 nightclub. A really terrible shooting that resulted from an altercation inside the club. It spilled outside of the club. Shots were fired. This young girl was killed. Several others were injured. So Barrow and Smith are also charged with 5 counts of attempted second-degree murder. King is charged with 4 counts of attempted second-degree murder. It's a real mess in this shooting that seems to really be senseless. No reason that this had to take place, and we're going to cover it here starting tomorrow. But today's a very special day because we're covering all different kinds of special segments today. You heard earlier we were talking about revenge porn, and then we were talking about making a murderer, and now I have a very special case to talk with all of you about. It's coming out of the Supreme Court of the United States. It will be heard on December 5th. The Supreme Court will hear a case about wedding cake. You heard me correctly, wedding cake. Jack Phillips is a baker and owner of the Colorado-based Masterpiece Cake Shop. Now, he refused to make a cake for a gay wedding for a same-sex couple in violation of Colorado's public accommodations law. Now, Phillips is arguing that he refused to make this cake because it goes against his religious beliefs. He is arguing freedom of religion. He is arguing free speech, while the other side is arguing that this is discrimination, that this public accommodations law in Colorado protects against this. So who's right? What are we going to expect on December 5th? Well, to help me talk a little bit more about this, I'm again joined by Aaron Keller, our very own. Now, Aaron, this cake case, okay? I love cake. Maybe you love cake. Not what I was
known to eat cake from time to time.
Not what I was expecting when I first read this. What is Mr. Phillips' argument here? I mean, on one side, it seems that he's just discriminating against a group of people. But if it really goes against his religion and his religious beliefs, and he has the right to make any cakes that he wants, what is the argument here from his perspective?
Well, so the issue, when it's boiled down into one line for the court to consider, is whether or not a public accommodation law in Colorado could allow him to basically decline service because, in his opinion, meaning the cake shop owner's opinion, the act of writing something on the cake is speech, that he is engaging in speech himself by writing a message that ultimately a customer would request, and that by the act of doing that is forcing him to speak in a way that he just does not want to speak. Well, part of free speech is also free silence. If someone doesn't want to speak about something, they don't have to speak about it. And that's the crux of his argument, is should he be forced to decorate a cake or write on it? Should he be forced, in his opinion, to speak in a way that his religious beliefs would dictate that he shouldn't speak? That's what it boils down to. It is a question about whether or not he should be required to speak a certain way.
Now, again, because again, it would look like he's endorsing a certain way of life, something that would go against his religious beliefs. But isn't the counter argument to that this law is really not forcing him to do anything? It's just saying, in other words, if you decide to make wedding cakes, You can't make wedding cakes for a heterosexual couple and then not make wedding cakes for a homosexual couple. So it's not fair to say that we're forcing you to do anything. Isn't that the counter argument there?
That is. It's part of the counter argument. Part of the argument might just be that you're not the one speaking. It's the customer speaking, and all you're doing is going through the motions of transcribing it into buttercream. Okay? That could be one way that the court would look at it.
Now, he didn't design anything yet. So I thought that was interesting where they said you decided, before you even designed what the cake would look like, you chose not to make this cake. But then the counter argument is, well, he's also decided not to make Halloween cakes because those goes against his religious belief. So I feel like that's a stronger argument, that he's not quite singling out this couple or this particular group of people. But if he has created a shop where he refuses to make certain cakes because of certain religious connotations or certain social connotations, isn't that fair?
Well,
I mean, isn't this art?
Look, we can sit and bat these imponderables around. I'm going to closely read this opinion when the court finally decides on it because it tees up so many issues. What if he were registered not as a business but as a religious nonprofit?
Okay.
What if the business model changes? Then what?
It's a great example. Now, the Trump administration has sided with him, correct? Haven't they sided with him in their briefs?
I haven't read the Solicitor General's brief on this. It wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, so now the counter argument. We have a ton of groups. The ACLU is now backing and representing this couple, and they're backed by another series of organizations: Lambda Legal, Human Rights Campaign, 200 bakers, chefs, and businesses have joined this fight too. It's huge. This is a really important case. Everybody's following it. So when you have these kind of cases where you see somebody arguing that this is free speech and I have my right to religious freedom, when somebody is also arguing on the other side that this is discrimination, in your opinion, from cases that you've seen, how does the Supreme Court generally favor? What do they favor here? Really, what do you see?
Well, I'm struggling to try to figure out exactly where the court's going to go on this, and I'll admit that I haven't spent hours and hours trying to jump through the mental somersaults of guessing, because if I were to guess, I would probably be wrong on this one. But look, it tees up issues about access to services. Okay, a lot of people would analogize it to the lunch counter cases that involve civil rights. If someone is a minority and they want to get something for lunch, do they have a right to walk in a lunch counter that's open to the public and be served? Well, we settled that case quite some time ago. We settled it with regards to the hotel and motel industry, that they can't discriminate against members of a race. So a lot of people analogize this, say, hey, look, if you're going to put the open sign on your door, you got to take the business that walks in the door and end the story. But here, we're teeing it up as a different issue. We're in fundamental rights. We're not in civil rights. So it's a constitutional right, not a statutory right. We're in a little bit different legal area, and that does change the analysis just a bit.
See, I think, and I've read this, and I've kind of read a bit of the opinion, that wouldn't have made more sense that it's not fair for him to discriminate against a group of people. But maybe what he should have done is put a disclaimer somewhere on his website, maybe in the store, that says whatever cakes I make for people is not an endorsement of their religious beliefs, their private beliefs, their relationship beliefs, anything. It's not an endorsement. I'm just making cakes to make some money. Wouldn't that have been a better thing to do?
Well, maybe, but again, is that going to be enough to get over whatever he is arguing are his personally held beliefs? If he doesn't want to say it, do we force him to say it? And then, as I said before, is it even his speech?
Yeah, and it's an interesting argument on both sides because from one side, yes, there's a reason we have this public accommodations law. We want to fight discrimination in any kind of area. They compared this level of art in cake. It's the same thing if people are discriminated in hair salons or restaurants. There's artistic skills involved there.
I would hate to have either of us discriminated against in a hair salon.
I wouldn't want it either. It sounds like it could have very dangerous results. But the counter argument is that this guy, he's entitled to believe and have whatever religious beliefs he wants. He said, or at least this is an argument that's made, I could have sold them anything. I would have made them anything. I would have made them a birthday cake. I would have made them cakes, cupcakes. I could have sold them any product they wanted. But you're asking me to make a wedding cake, and that's a little bit of different. That is a different kind of message. What do you say about that argument?
Well, I mean, advocates for the couple would turn around and say, well, okay, look, you're trying to change the facts of the issue here. The issue is they didn't come in and order a birthday cake. And a lot of people would look at that and say, it sounds like an excuse by the cake baker to try to condone what he's doing. Again, if you put an open sign on the door, the argument of the couple is you put an open sign on the door, you got to serve the customers that come in off the streets. You can't turn around and say, I'm not serving you because you've got gray hair. I'm not serving you because of your religion. I'm not serving you because of the color of your skin, that we just don't operate that way in the United States. That's the argument of the couple. Now, the argument of the baker is one that he believes it's just so tightly tied to his personal speech that he just can't bring himself to do it. I don't know what the solution is to that. I'm not in the position of sitting on the court. I don't sit on the court. I don't want to sit on the court because part of me just doesn't want to make the decision. I don't know. Where do you go with it? And like I said, part of me wonders if one way the court could look at this is to say, if you're registered as a public corporation or an LLC, you serve the business that comes in. But if you're a 501c3, we've already seen some of this go down. We've got Hobby Lobby. We've got, we already know that churches don't need to hire people who go against church teaching or synagogue teaching, wherever you are. A synagogue doesn't need to hire an ordained Catholic priest to put together the services because it's not the religion. We already know that. So part of me wonders if this is an issue that's going to result in different incorporation statuses where somebody will be able to register as a religious corporation or something like that. But even then, I mean, okay, where is that going to lead us? Is a major auto manufacturer or an airline or a gas station company or a fast food franchise going to, is the world going to become divided up on religious guidelines? Or do we operate as the presumption that you've got your beliefs, you can have them, I've got my beliefs, I've got them, but we can still sit and do business? What's the court going to look at? What's the court going to enforce here?
See, I think it's interesting because what happens if someone came into his bakery or someone comes into a bakery and you refuse to make a product for somebody, for a hate group, for neo-Nazis? They wanted a cake where they wanted a swastika on the cake. And you say, I refuse to make that. Now, what about that? Isn't they have a right to believe what they want to believe? I have a right not to make this cake, but where does it go? And the reason I ask this is because on both sides, they say that this case is going to really push the country in a certain way. Some people think in a good way, some people think in a negative way, but the question becomes, what is free speech? When are you allowed to do something? When are you forced to do something? Is this really forcing you to do something? And when does it become the level where you can operate a business, but you can choose what kind of business you really want to operate? And I think it's an interesting discussion because on the other side, this couple just wanted a cake. They just wanted a cake for their wedding, and they didn't want to get into this fight. Well, so I think it's a really interesting both sides of it.
There are a lot of religious groups and groups that are closely affiliated with members of the religious community that believe and argue publicly that members of the same-sex union crowd are purposefully going into these business and targeting. I've heard that argument made. So, yeah, the quote of the day from Jesse Weber is that this case is going to push the country in some direction. I'm really interested to see where it's going to go because all of these are valid arguments. There are members of the religious community that feel as though they're the ones being victimized by people trying to get them to provide a service that they have a religious disagreement with. There are members of the gay rights community that believe they're the ones being discriminated against. And at this point, we've got a country where people are just pointing the finger at one another saying, you're discriminating against me, and it's just a loop. It just keeps going back and forth. There's a similar case in upstate New York near Albany where there is a venue that said it would not open itself to same-sex ceremonies, and now that's tied up in litigation that's not dissimilar to this litigation. So this is a fight that's going on not just in Colorado, it's going on here in New York, it's going on in a lot of different communities. What are the parameters going to be? I'm waiting to see how the court chooses to look at the issue. Part of me wonders if one way that they might look at it, and this is just speculation, is to turn around and say it's not the owner's speech, it's the customer's speech.
I think that's the way that they're tailoring it so far from what I've saw from the lower court briefs, the opinions about that. I think that's the argument that they might flavor. To be honest, I don't know which way they're going to go. We do expect arguments December 5th, but it really is an interesting case from both sides. Like you said, discrimination discourages discrimination.
It is a very important case. Very important.
My biggest disappointment is has nothing really to do with cake. I really was hoping that it would have been something more delicious than that, and now I'm just hungry.
I'm
now
upset that you didn't provide a cake here for us to discuss.
I know. This is failing. I'm just failing on multiple levels.
Chocolate.
So anyway,
please.
Thank you very much for talking about this case as well as the latest development in Making a Murderer, Aaron. It's great having you on. Whether a guest, host, it's always good to have you on here.
We'll have to switch. I'll host, you guest.
We'll just keep switching and see if people notice the difference.
Well, I was here this morning and people didn't think it was you, so we do have a separation of personality.
Aaron, thank you so much. Okay, guys, so everybody, we are, again, that is the case for coming out of the Supreme Court December 5th. If we have an update in that case, we'll make sure to talk definitely about it because, as we talked about, it's really important. Again, we are covering the Holly Bobo case, which we covered a few months ago. We had a decision in that case about the Zachary Adams trial. Zachary Adams was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and rape of Miss Bobo, this 20-year-old nursing student out of Tennessee. And now, in the next few months, starting on May 29th, which was scheduled this past last week, we will see the trial of John Dylan Adams. And when we come back, we're going to have a very special guest to talk to us about what's the community feeling about this? What's the latest developments in this case? What's happening on the ground level of this case? We're going to have Burton Staggs, news director for WOPC HD News, near where this trial will start. So again, he's going to be a great guest to talk about this Holly Bobo case. Again, we are covering that one. Tomorrow we will be covering a new case out of Florida, the Barrow, King, and Smith case, a nightclub shooting from 2015 where a young 19-year-old girl was killed and several others were injured. And we'll make sure to cover that tomorrow,